Hi there, it's the Lean Into Art Cast, the show where a couple of visual storytellers get together and engage with a topic. What kinds of topics? Visual storytelling topics. We think hard about visual storytelling, so you will too. My name is Jersey Droz, and the kind of visual storyteller I happen to be is a cartoonist, which is to say I make comic books, and teaching artist, which is to say I teach how to make comics. The other host is...
Hey, I'm Rob Stenzinger, and I'm another kind of visual designer. From time to time, I'll enjoy making some comics, but often I'm working in the areas of user experience design and expressing designs in a sort of collaborative way, but visually helping others participate in a rationale that can make an interactive system better. And other times, it's for just making good old video games.
Good old video games, which we can find at... do you have like a single source of where people can purchase all your video games?
Well, I guess to find projects that I do, and for quick links, robstenzinger.com is a nice place.
When did you get that?
Oh, a long time ago.
Really?
Yeah.
It's been Interactive Storyteller for so long.
Well, that's where you would find like my blog and the Polytechnicast and other things and content, right? Things I write or record, stuff like that. They're kind of like my solo project things. But let's say you're someone who is thinking more about like portfolio kinds of like wanting to see like what I do, right?
I apologize, Rob. I've seen this site. You've shown it to me before.
Yeah, so they all have different purposes.
Yeah.
Might not be a bad idea to unite them. Always worth experimenting and exploring there. But that's where they are right now.
So the umbrella site is robstenzinger.com. Jealous. Super jealous.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, what a delightful thing. You have a musical instrument doppelganger.
Yeah, doppelganger.
That's delightful.
I had the chance. Like 12 years ago to get it. I was like, I'm not going to be that guy who has his name as a .com. And now I'm telling all my students, if you can get your name as a .com, get your name as a .com. Don't be like me.
Don't be like me. Get your .com. Well, it's nice. It's a handy thing, but you know what? There are a lot of great URLs out there, Jersey.
That's true.
Yeah, not a worry.
We'll mention a lot of them today.
Yeah.
So good to be back. Good to be back and talking with you about visual storytelling. And we pick a different topic every week and we chip at it in a couple different sections. We kind of try to talk a little bit more of a practical approach, and then we usually back out and ask a lot of why questions about the topic. So are you ready to dive into it?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Okay. This is the thing I do with my students all the time. So this is the rating system. Like, this is not all. This is this is like, oh yeah. How intense are you feeling today, Rob? That's going to determine our bridge music.
Am I feeling?
Yeah.
It depends on what stimulus is in my world. I'm pretty mellow right now. I'm thoughtful, contemplative.
All right.
Default Rob.
A little bit more laid back. As we bridge over to our first section, we'll go on the ground. We were talking about 90s hip-hop before we started recording.
What is this?
It was the Ninja
It sounds like, oh, God. Oh, awesome. It's on the dance floor for a moment. I'm like, oh, yeah. I enjoy this. All right, Ninja. Nice. All right.
All right. So, gosh, how do I frame this one up? The title that we came up, well, I kind of bypassed you on this one, Rob. Like, when do you know if you're established? And I picked that one because that's like a term that I find to be very difficult to navigate. The term established, because like there's a lot of different ways to be established, and also, I break out in hives when I start to think about hierarchies and groups and things. Not that it, what?
So, in some ways, being established can be defined in a variety of different directions, but then there could be a lot to unbox here, right?
Yeah.
What a perfect topic for us, because that's one of the, I mean, that's our specialty here. We're like thoughtful topic movers, right? We have a van.
Yeah.
And we we pick it up, but we also unbox them and stuff. So we're like full service, thoughtful movers.
Full service,
Mhm.
thoughtful movers.
Yeah,
That's pretty good.
so
Hey, let's hang on to that for future shows. But this topic, like this has been on my mind for a few weeks now because I've been having a lot of different conversations with different groups of people, and this seems to be on a lot of people's minds a lot of the time. This idea of where you are on your creative journey professionally, like where your career is, and measuring it, measuring your work, evaluating your work, but evaluating your career as well. Are you making good choices? And uh, navigating the difficulty of measuring where you are when you're getting various signals from various kinds of sources, like whether it's on people's blogs or whether it's the way people present themselves on television, whether it's the narrative that you were told by your instructor or your parents. There's a lot of different measurement tools.
mm,
Um, and I don't want to just default to like, doing the easy, like, well, just listen to your heart. What does your heart tell you? I mean, that doesn't seem like a terribly thoughtful and useful summary of the idea, although we may land there, but not before we've like sifted through all the materials. And
mhm.
if I could go through like some of my evidence of why this has been on people's minds, Rob, is that cool?
Yeah, sounds excellent.
All right, so like here we go. Like I've just on Twitter in the last 24 hours at the time of this recording. Jim Zub on Twitter, starts this thread where he says, someone asks him, "Is there an antidote? Being serious here. Anytime I try to work on art, I see stuff my friends are doing, right? Like that sense of envy of like, wow, I'm watching all these amazing people online and they're doing great work, and boy, I'm never gonna stack up to that." And Jim Zub says, like, if seeing stuff your friends are doing makes you jealous every time, I think you need some soul searching. You can't thrive carrying that. And there's like a whole lot of follow up on this, right? I'm not immune to jealousy or frustration, but all I can do is step away and focus on building instead of tearing down. Well, then Ryan North of Dinosaur Comics chimes in on this too. Same day. Attention artists, sometimes your friends will have successes and you'll be jealous even if you don't want to be. You know? And I do want to read his thread all the way down because he rounds it off in a very interesting way that I want to dig at a little bit later. He says, don't make posts tearing them down and don't passive aggressively say, oh, wow, good for you. I had a great pitch for that. Parenthetically, that just makes the person feel bad and implies their success is your failure. It's never a zero sum like that. Instead, just be happy for them. They're your friend and they're doing great, and that's awesome. And you're so happy. And if you can't be happy for them, if despite your efforts you're still jealous, if you can't rise above your demons, then trick them. Put it in selfish terms, on a purely selfish level. Wouldn't you want your friends to be successful? Because if you're in a room full of powerful, successful people who like you, jealous peeps just need to be more Machiavellian. The end. And then, yeah, I thought that was pretty good. Like, well, I mean,
Fun.
baked in that is like a motivation to just improve and push yourself forward, using that feeling to push yourself on, right? In my inbox today, I get an email from Trello, and they're like, "Oh, hey, here's a blog post about aim to fail, why rethinking rejection can increase productivity." Like, gosh, this is on everybody's minds, right? We'll link to these in the show notes too, and possibly dig at these a little bit more. But then, I was at Nerd Camp in Nerd Camp, Michigan this past couple days, and I actually sketch noted a panel discussion. They asked me to be on the panel. I'm like, I'm not very good on panels. They're like, well, what if you drew? And I'm like, oh, I can sketch note your panel. I think I could do well. And one of the topics that came up, and I'll zoom in on it, was this topic of rejection. And someone said rejection means you're playing the game. But like you're gonna get rejection from everybody.
Hold it. This is a fantastic bit of work, Jersey.
Oh, thanks.
This, yeah. So this is a just as a tangent. So when I'm taking a look at this on YouTube, everyone sees what's happening here. But like for theater of the mind or the radio or the audio podcast, this there's a big old large wall size Post-it note and a bunch of drawings on there, and it's like blocky figures and that kind of thing. A lot of cartoony expressive work with a lot of different concepts surrounding it. And in recent times, I mean, there's a lot of this gets ascribed to like sketch notes or whatnot, but like this is a kind of a longer tradition of like meeting scribing, right? And being that person who's just capturing different kinds of essences of what's being said. And I just want to flag that. Maybe that's a nice topic to dive into some other episode, right?
Oh, happy
But
to.
this
Yeah.
is really cool.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I was actually when I first started and they started talking, there was this initial thrill of panic of like, oh, I got to keep up with this. But then once I got 5 minutes in, I was like, okay, I'm getting the sense of what ideas are worth capturing, which ones have visual metaphors. So like this one of the panelists was talking about when they were a child and they enjoyed just laying on the floor and writing, but then they grew up and then they went into law. They stole extra time to become an author and they rediscovered the love, right? And so then I drew her in the same position as when she was a child, right? Like visual things like that to connect ideas. Um, but yeah, but like this part here where she was talking about, it's like, oh, I felt like I wrote the greatest script ever, but then publishers told me different, and I felt rejected and despondent. But then I remind myself that rejection means you're playing the game. If you're not getting rejected, you're not playing along in the game, right? Um,
Yeah,
and
that's a pretty huge concept.
I thought, yeah, I thought that was a pretty great way of framing it up. But then Diju San, who gets mentioned on the show a lot, she had a thread that I tweeted out actually, where she said, and this is something that I have so much trouble expressing to my students and describing to my students. She says, all artists face self-doubt and have a way of putting themselves down, pro and beginner alike. But I personally found that the more one creates, the more they learn and shut those voices down. Improvement happens unconsciously too, so it's win-win. Being apologetic about your art and expressing that it's not good has two outcomes. One, it drives serious artists away from your art because if they themselves don't care, in quotes, if they themselves don't care for what they create, why should I? And two, it drives other people to give you comments on how good you are, something that is inspiring but won't help in the long run. And she says, being enough is an inside job. A gold medal is a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough without one, you'll never be enough with one, right? So this is all of these posts and the conversations that I've been having with other artists have demonstrated to me that like this is something that is a real pain point, right? The sense of how do I know that what I'm doing is counting towards something, that it matters to people? What kind of signals can I look for? And I know that you and I have our own way of thinking about this. I'm sure we have lots of opinions on this subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now that I buckshot the side of the barn, where do you want to go?
I think we should touch on some examples that we've seen firsthand, right?
Okay.
So, like there's a lot of framing here, but like thinking of this like really practically, and accepting that, I mean, you've laid out this premise that, well, this kind of thing happens to everybody. This kind of the worry, the concern, self-doubt, maybe framing things from points of view that aren't necessarily helping get you toward an outcome that you're seeking, right? Like, probably not setting yourself up to dig in and make progress on a thing if you've already framed that your contribution to that thing is not of value, or that thing when in the end will not be of value to who you're trying to provide it to. I mean, it's tough to like then dig in, but like hitting on a few examples of that would I think be helpful, and then maybe seeing where that goes. Like a classic for me is I've worked on a game project for years called Jinhanu, that the outcome was a lot of experience in collaboration and finding out like how in some contexts it's almost like I found I have these naturally good habits when I'm being directly paid for something, but then when I'm not being paid for it, then all of a sudden other things creep in, and like things that it's easy to just say, well, gosh, my biggest problem is I want perfection out of myself and what have you, right? And golly gee, isn't that a burden? And honestly, it's real. I don't mean to make light of it in sort of voicing it in that silly way, but like it's easy to use that as a way to sort of disengage from being accountable for not getting where you wanted to be, right? So somehow noticing that failure, embracing the lessons from it from as many angles as makes sense, but yet not being beleaguered by it and moving on. Like uh, I worked on that project with a few different configurations of people who collaborated with me. I learned a lot by working with them. And if like for instance, I found out that I can be on, in those days in that context, a collaborator that was um, not driving stuff forward. So it's like I was willing to set down different hats as far as really getting a thing to be made by either stopping on the whole editing hat saying nope, but this has to be better, this has to be better, and that's what I would apply to my own work. But then others work on the project, I would be like, yes, that's great, now that's part of this too, yes, that's great, that's part of this too. And so it was in this untenable swirl of evolving chaos of like, the game was totally a to coin a or to quote an ancient Saturday Night Live skit, it was totally a dessert topping and a floor wax.
I actually remember that one.
Anyway, yeah. So I mean, there was a ton of lessons from that, very valuable, super painful at the time, and then it's easy to like get like beleaguered in the personal difficulty of processing that kind of thing, and then having that be an impediment for either picking the next project or digging in, and running the risk of repeating some of the habits that weren't helping before. So yeah, so I ended up becoming comfortable enough with that, and then starting to just move forward again eventually on another game project. And that and let's see, what the first one that I actually got out was a few years later, and that was Guitar Fretter. So, but at the same time, it's, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say it's still online today. You still get Guitar Fretter.
Yes, you can, for iOS. It fell out of the Android store at the moment.
At the moment.
Always stuff to learn.
No, but yeah, digging into one of my own examples is 10 years ago when I got. Oh, and by the way, I should mention, if you're really interested in hearing all of our successes and failures from the past decade, we did a whole episode on this.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the first, I think it was the last one of last year, right, of 2016. We did an episode called 2006 versus 2016, where we kind of evaluated the last 10 years of our professional lives, creative lives, and sort of looked at what worked and what didn't, and what did we learn, what was the learning process. It was I think it's a 2-hour episode. It was an exhaustive look at, and we did a boatload of research to make that one happen.
Mm-hmm.
One might think like, oh, well, how much research are you doing? It's your life. It's like, digging back 10 years and putting everything in order was like a lot more challenging than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, to have enough information to think, oh, this is what I, because you're creating new chapters as you dig up these memories, and like, how do I, like, what did happen? I mean, gosh, that was like 10 years ago, and that's but it was a fun reflection exercise, kind of an epic reflection, right?
It was.
We typically are like, yeah, take notes, yeah, journal, but this is more like, go dig in your basement and find stuff that's ancient.
Yeah,
that was hard and fun.
But it was episode 169. So for those who are curious, and we'll link to it in the show notes as well. But to dig into some of those stories from that pile, 2007, about 10 years ago, I started teaching comics classes for the first time, not without any knowledge of how to do it or what I was doing. I was just kind of just thrown in the water and started thrashing around. And I got some excellent training from a professor from the University of Michigan. That's really where I felt like, okay, I'm becoming a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And I find out that I'm really good at it. And I get all these signals saying, like, this is meaningful. I'm changing kids' lives, and I'm sharing what I know with people who would normally not have access to this. I'm getting paid well for it. I'm getting institutional support for what I'm doing. A lot of really good stuff came with that. And so then, like, you think, okay, well, it's just going to get better, right? And it's like, well, the next year, it's like, we want to fund an even more ambitious version of this. So, Jersey, you're going to be visiting even more schools. I'm like, let me at them. I'm ready. And funding didn't happen. So it's like, oh, I guess it's not, the band's breaking up. That's a bum out. But then it's like, oh, but the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts is interested in having you come out. They're going to fly you out to Washington, D.C., and you're going to do a 2-day workshop where you train teachers how to do this. So it will be sustainable because you are going to start training teachers to go out into the world and do what you do. So you don't have to do all the school visits. You'll be like the nexus that sends this stuff into the world. I'm like, that sounds exciting. And then what's more is I heard from other people, and they're like, yeah, and if you do a good enough job, this could turn into like a road tour gig where you're traveling the country doing this all over the place all the time. This could become your career, and then you know you can support your comics with teaching comics. I'm like, wow, that sounds pretty exciting. I do the gig, I get the gig, right? Wow, this is great. I'm teaching at the I walk. Have you ever been there? It's like a building built for giants. Like it really feels incredible to walk into that building and like be wanted there, right? I teach the workshop and I think I do an excellent job. Everybody seems really happy. And then like, okay, well now you have to audition again to do a more ambitious version. I'm like, all right. I put together a whole pitch. I work for weeks on it. I do phone interviews with them. And I'm like, this is how I'm thinking it's going to work. And these are the kind of concepts I'm going to teach. And they're like, yeah, no, we're not really interested in that. And I really wanted that job. I mean, I wanted it. Like when they said no, and they were sad about it too. You know, they were really nice and they're like, we're really sorry, but this is totally not what we're looking for. I was crushed. You know, I was like, oh, I thought I was on this rise, right? All these signals saying like you're doing good, you're doing good, and now it's like, no, you're not doing good. You know, and it's like, and I think like that's when I would think about this kind of thinking of one's career. I just think of that scene with Homer Simpson in that Treehouse of Horror episode with the Frogurt, right? And it's like, that's good, that's bad, you know? It's like there's only two signals in one's career. Either that's good or that's bad, right?
I have no idea this reference. What's a Frogurt?
Oh, they did a Treehouse of Horror episode where Homer, he forgot to get Bart's birthday present. No, was it his birthday present? Yeah, no, it was, yeah. He forgot to get Bart's birthday present, and he winds up going to this cursed object store where they sell him a demonic Krusty the Clown doll. And he's like, oh, you know, it's like we sell only cursed, hideous objects. And Homer's like, that's bad. And he's like, but they come with a free Frogurt. He's like, that's good. He's like, but the Frogurt is also cursed. That's bad. And this goes on for like 2 minutes. You get your choice of toppings. That's good. The toppings are filled with potassium benzoate. That's bad. So.
Okay.
But I think of that binary kind of thinking when I think about how some people talk about their careers, right? It's like, well, and to quote you, we're in a room with failure. Our allergies to the word failure, right? And
Yeah,
that's not to take away from the disappointment. I mean, like I said, I was crushed. I was really, really, I wanted that job, and it was super disappointing, and it was demoralizing to not get it. But you know, that, and I don't know if this is too much in the next section, we go 10,000 feet up, but like there's like that branding that we put on it. There's a big F for failure on that effort, right? Therefore, I'm moving back down the line in the linear progression towards what we call success.
Well, and it's really tough because like how brittle is success when it has that kind of like how many variables have to change with it before it instantly falls off of that binary success or failure. And then even then, like the failure, well, what comes of that? Because there's, let's see, like my first game project failed. It was kind of a geeky garage band thing that I've talked about before. But then that entire band of people got careers in, you know, technology. And, you know, I learned a ton from there and then whatever. I mean, so many things. It's kind of like your story and your path are really hard to judge directly in a meaningful way based on anyone else's path. And that has been really tough for me, right? Because looking for a signal of who likes to do the different kinds of things I like to do. I would like to learn from them. And like, you know, I follow signals here and there and find inspiration and learn a lot of stuff from people who are into anything from like, well, comics, game designers, obviously, right? But like then data visualization, data journalism, all this stuff where I just like, I'm fascinated by it, whatever, looking for signals of like where to go next too, because that's part of the whole thing. But then depending on what place you choose to look on, like, oh, that label. Okay, I heard that label. Now I hear someone else talking about that label. I want to serve there. I want to help out on that thing. They could have a totally different story about that and look at you like, well, or look at me in this case, like, what? How do you fit with our story? And that's like, I've had that experience, signing NDAs. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not going to reveal any names or anything. But like, I was helping an East Coast university and on a game design project, and things were going great. But then it's at a certain point, we needed to get approval, and I did estimates for going to the next phase to actually make this thing that I had worked with that team to define and propose. Totally didn't get funding, and it just super puzzling because lots of positive signals, but all of a sudden, like, well, project's getting shut down. That's a pretty negative one. So, yeah. Anyway, failures are. I don't know what a more useful term would be, because it's like there are crossroad or like points in time that my expectations are a mismatch for what's about to happen. And then the thing happens that's not what I expected. And then what story do I wrap it in at that point? And I've got a lot of those.
I want to underline that expression that you used, like how brittle the success is. I think there's different levels of success plasticity, right?
This sounds like a good metric.
Maybe we can explore that metric in the next section. You wanna take a break for a second, then we can dig into the next part.
Yeah,
we talk about awesome. Like the feelings part of this whole thing, because we started to talk about it. I want to dig a little bit more at that, a little bit more like some why questions about this, and explore this idea of success plasticity. But before we do that, we got to thank some folks who make this show possible, and those people happen to be the folks who support us on Patreon. What is Patreon? If you haven't heard of it, it is like a Kickstarter, but for ongoing projects, right? So instead of like pledging once to have a thing come out several months or a year later, you pledge month to month to keep something going, as little as $1 a month. And we want to thank 5 people who have been doing just that, and we appreciate their support. First up, we want to thank Casey Snipes, who you can find on Twitter at letter K, letter C, Snipes. Thank you so much, Casey, for believing in us and the work that we do. And then Nick Bernstein, I don't have your Twitter handle, but if you want to lay it on us sometime in a message on the Patreon post for this episode, we would love to include it next time. Mark Falk, and Mark can be found on Twitter at Radimere, Radimere. Thank you, Mark, for believing in us. And Nathan Seabolt, who you can find on Twitter at N_Seabolt. Thank you, Nathan, for supporting us. And finally, Shawnee Redfearn, who you can find on Twitter at Shawnee Redfearn. Thanks to everybody who has been supporting us. And if you want to go to patreon.com/leanintoart, that's where you can support us. For as little as $1 a month, you will get all the episodes emailed to you if you choose to leave email notifications on. But also, you'll get access to our extra lean shows, the shows that we do just for Patreon supporters. It's like a shorter version of the show where Rob and I just riff, and it usually turns into a lot of fun nonsense, but also a lot of really cool, thoughtful stuff, too. Once again, that URL is patreon.com/leanintoart. It should be easy to remember, after all. And thanks to everybody who has been supporting us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Let's pick, how about something, oh gosh, we have feelings, but I'm still going to do something cheerful. Let's be a little hopeful about this next part as we think about failure, plasticity.
Yeah, that's the so if success is super brittle, it probably is not resilient to something changing, right? Like what if you suddenly get a new context of like, I feel pretty good about the sales of Guitar Fretter, but then other folks who've sold, have had far greater successes, right? And I start comparing myself there, like, and if I'm open to that and I start participating in it, and then it's like, well, now I probably have pretty brittle success versus being like, willing to, I don't know, like separate those things and not trying to judge and define my stuff based on others' work in that way.
Right, right. I mean,
Is that kind of where you're going with success?
no, yeah, I do want to go there a little bit because like I don't want to just oversimplify it into like, well, you redefine what success is for yourself and therefore, but I think
Sure,
it's
that's a perfect formula for the Dunning Kruger effect, where you're like, you're always successful, keep
right.
rocking.
Yeah. All you have to do is
First
just say
rule of
it.
Dunning Kruger Fight Club is you don't know if you're in Dunning Kruger Fight Club.
That's actually, yeah, that's a good description of it.
Someone said that. Yeah, not my quote.
Um, no, but yeah, it's I don't want to just simplify it down to like, well, just change the parameters and therefore you'll be a winner every time. But there is like this danger, and I don't even know if is it worth going into. Do we need to go into this whole thing about like everybody else is firing off their own signals, and those signals are curated, and those signals, I don't even want to say if they're curated to be overly positive, overly negative. Everybody's got their own bias and their own voice in the way that they're sending out their signals. But the point is that they are not the sole data point on where everybody stands in relation to one another. There's a lot of different ways of there's a lot of missing data there, and also there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, right? Um,
Yeah, I mean there's also like I'm totally not a psychologist. But like whatever you're bringing to the situation to evaluate it, I guess the more comfortable you are in unboxing and processing your own sort of worldview and issues, things like that, sensitivities that can help. It doesn't mean like it's gonna like just like that what used to be a big roller coaster is super flat, or no big drama or what have you. It still might be difficult to process, but like you may develop the tools to process it
mhm.
better for projects going forward.
Was it you who introduced me to the concept of fixed versus growth mindset?
Maybe certainly got I got all I still think it's a fantastic concept and area of psychology, but maybe.
Do you feel confident enough to summarize it for us?
Yeah, certainly. So, okay, if let's see, this is one of the few times where I find a fairly binary thing being like a great tool. So this is a fairly binary thing where you can, and yet it's not binary where sometimes you could have a fixed mindset, sometimes you could have a growth mindset. What are these two things? I imagine a lot of the leaners are totally familiar, but briefly, if you're in a mode of having a fixed mindset, like a mindset being sort of like this overall framing of your like how are you processing stuff going on, right? So you get the big news of like a friend's project that really hits big and is very successful, what have you. And if you're in a fixed mindset, you may think that their success, let's see, it's or when success happens, it's like all about they're great and maybe I'm not great. Or when I get success, it's like it's less adaptable. Like fixed mindset is like it's a little more scarcity driven. And
They've got something that I don't have. We've heard that expression before. What do they got that I ain't got? Right?
oh yeah, right on. Whereas a growth mindset could be, I think I could become that. I think there's something that I'm not doing yet that I bet I could learn to evolve. And maybe it's not the same thing as what they're doing, but like that's a signal to me that there's more to learn. I'm excited, and I'm open to this learning. Right. So the growth mindset it inherently is more adaptable.
And I think like that's what I'm hearing a lot of times when I hear people expressing frustration with where their career path is like I hear a little bit of that sense of there's only so much to go around and I should have gotten my piece by now, right?
Mm.
And I don't even know if it's worth going to the whole thing about like life schedules, right? Like that I feel like that's a narrative that just refuses to die. The sense that by this age you should have accomplished this, and by that age you should accomplish that. And I have evidence of its power because I still see in my Facebook feed every once in a while somebody shares that thing where it's like, oh, Oprah Winfrey did this when she was 41, and Jack Kirby didn't make Fantastic Four until he was 44, whatever. You know, like there's these listicles of people who accomplish great things later in life than earlier in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there's like a fixed mindset in the sense of, well, they've got something that I just don't got, or I really should have done more with this by now. Which I feel like it's such a perilous way to frame things up for yourself.
So, I mean, I guess we just, the one metaphor I like to, it's not that funny, but like I think of like the firefighting arsonist, right? Where we provided both the problem and the cure in what we're talking about here. And I try not to, that's actually a thing I try to look for as far as like an unhealthy collaborator situation where I'm like, oh, okay, I see you. You just started another fire and you're going to go put it out, aren't you? Oh, anyway, separate topic.
Yeah.
So, well, what are you thinking as far as,
well,
so the life schedule thing. I mean, it's almost like there are many sources of these kind of signals that we might have to face.
Mm-hmm.
Is one thing I'm hearing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the example I think of is like when I was a little kid and Star Search would come on the TV. Remember Star Search, that show that Ed McMahon would have like different people on to like sing and dance, right?
Yeah.
And invariably there would be an episode where it'd be like a 9-year-old who tap dances or sings or something, and people are always blown away. I mean, as you would be. You see like somebody so young, showing such prowess and such ease in front of a large audience, right?
Yeah, prowess is really admirable. I mean, that's a pretty common human thing where you're like, wow, look at what you've grown, developed, or what have you.
Right. And so then you hear stories, and stand-up comedians talk about this, and like the parent or the grandparent looks down at them while this is on, saying like, they're 9, you know, you're 12. What's going on here? You know, this sense of like, if you see excellence someplace, you better catch up, because otherwise you're not as good, right? Like this sense that like their success is somehow taking away from you somehow, right? Instead of it being like, wow, isn't it cool that they were able to do that? If you wanted to do that, you could probably do it. I'll help.
But starting with this super unhelpful, judgmental observation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. This reminds me of that kind of categorization and judgment is kind of like something that I think we can really feed into sometimes is having typically the like disciplines that can be put in the bucket of you're a creative person, right? And all of a sudden now you're in this bucket that says you're the place where magic and ideas come from, and who knows, that's you've got that, and whatever, and then so maybe that I don't know, maybe that works for some folks, right? But that I think there's a problem when you start accepting some of these kinds of buckets that that create this sort of false scarcity of, you know, where like creativity is, you know, I would argue that it's a human trait and it's present in every single endeavor that we do, and that there's the whole like even the business side. This is one thing I apply this measure to myself often, and I don't think it's helpful, and it's something I'm working on, but where like trying to be better at like the business aspect of projects, right? The concerns where like because I honestly think like comparing yourself to like the 9-year-old skillful dancer, I mean, what about someone who is making great choices about like what to focus on or not for like making a profit in what you're in your business, right? And then you look at that and then you're like, well, I'm a creative, I don't have that, I wish I had that. I do that to myself sometimes. And it's like, it's a skill. It's something to appreciate, but it's something that I could that can be grown, right? And it's like, no, I'm not going to dance like the 9-year-old awesome dancer, but like if I care, I could start. And
Right.
yeah. But so I do this too, I guess, is what I'm saying. I guess
And another
my
thing.
own judgmental relative in my head.
All right. But yes, and it's a hard thing to shake because I see it happening with the teens that I teach every year. You know, it's like around 12 to 13 that division starts happening where it's like, well, I'm no good at sports. I'll never be good at sports, right? I'm the artist or I'm the sports person. So I meet the kids when I go do like school visits and we're like, well, I'm the athlete. I'm not an artist. I never will be. You know, it's like, well, what does that got to do with drawing right now? You know, uh,
There's a lot, and then especially over time, as like, I mean, this is not to devalue like skills and areas of study and whatnot. Yet, I mean, we live in a time where many endeavors that we can do as humans can be provided as approachable, compartmentalized things called apps, right? And so now it's like it's a lot easier to run the finances for your business, right? Because you can adopt a cloud service or find the right kind of app, an open source thing. I mean, there's a lot out there. Where all of a sudden this skill gets embodied in a thing, and all it takes is like to just choose to use the thing. And that's I don't know, like the bucketing can prevent us from even so like in some ways sometimes I find like the best researcher, the best designer, the best storyteller, whatever, is whoever's there to like try.
yeah.
You know, like, and if it's like, and if you're not quite ready for it, you might be able to get at least slightly ready and begin, right? Where, especially if you're into the whole possibility of iterating on stuff.
That's the person who's there sometimes is the right person. Let's talk about that just for a second because I was also reminded of Kazu Kibuishi's post, his tweet that I've quoted a dozen times on the show. You know, spend time preparing for an opportunity and less time looking for one. Nothing worse than getting a chance at something without being prepared, right? You frame it this way, and it totally changes the role of like it switches you from hunter gatherer to being a student who's like refining their craft. So when that opportunity does pass in front of you, you're the right person who happens to be there, right?
Mm.
Like,
Yeah, that's I like that. I like that just from a lot of perspectives, because the preparing shows that I mean, even if this is something I'm just dabbling in, I may be in a better position to work with someone else where I may not have their role, but now I've got more of their language even. And so like what we're working on is better, because maybe you're working on a comic and then you happen to have been studying writing more than and you can have a better conversation with another part of your team. That's pretty awesome, and a benefit of preparing.
yeah. Whereas when you're hunter mode, you are again this reminded me of closed mindset or fixed mindset because it's like I have these skills, I got to find out where to apply them. I have to go out there. Where do I apply the skills? Where do I apply the skills? You know, I better find out. Whereas preparing for opportunities means like, no, I'm slow. It reminds you that you're always in a state of acquiring skills, right?
Hmm. And I'll also say like one of them is the whole idea of career is something interesting to me. I gave like a short talk on it that it was I think a year or two ago at maybe a year and a half ago at an event local in Minneapolis that was it was about culture and career hacking through commitments.
Mm.
And where if you are was that what happened?
No, I love where this is headed.
Yeah, well, culture and career hacking through commitments is saying that, well, you have the interest to try that thing, and that's a valid signal to start exploring. And then one way to, because if you're in that state of constantly preparing, maybe there's something in between preparing and looking, right? Because you could be preparing and then, but be noticeable. So being prepared and unavailable, like saying, like, go away, I'm studying, or whatever, is different than saying, like, being prepared and, hi, how's it going? Oh, what you doing? Well, I don't know, I'm looking at this thing, and I find it really fascinating. Oh my gosh, I'm actually really into this too. And like, then you find a way to relate that skill. That's applying the skills is where the value comes. It's where you engage in trade. It's not in the it's it can happen, but in one mindset, you are waiting for someone else's definition of career and where you fit, which may be awesome for you. But it's kind of like how in large organizations, there's kind of a career path and a predefined set of stages and definitions. Totally cool. Like, that is an approach that works great for some folks. But like, another way to go about it is to say, well, I think I discovered this next thing I want to do, a new kind of story, a genre, a medium, whatever. And now you're preparing yet open, and all of a sudden, there is the possibility of serving in that area. And this is what I've done. Like, that's how I went from garage band, game designer, to being a web architect, to being whatever. I mean, I got labeled lots of different stuff, right? But then and then it can be confusing, because then like, looking back and making sense of it, it's like, well, gosh, I guess I've always been a user-centered designer. Okay, I'm going to give a narrative to my own story. This is my career path. Instead of saying,
that's
like,
good too. Yeah, let's underline that. You're going to give a narrative to your own story.
Yeah. So,
but
yeah, where were you?
Well, you're making me think of, like, when you talked about you're talking about service-minded approaches as well, which is where I noticed things changing for me a lot. Now my story is not anybody else's story, but my story is an example that explains why I think what I think.
Survivor bias. Give a TED talk. We're ready.
Yeah. Right. But like, when I started out, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I see this happening when I go to certain kinds of events. Every once in a while, I run into this character who is like, "Oh, there was me a few years ago." It's like, I was so, when I was younger and like first going to conventions and things, I was so concerned about, like, what's the pecking order, who are the influencers, who do I need to know, and there was almost an urgency to the way I was engaging with people. I better be witty. I better be really witty and interesting. And I'm really nervous, and I'm actually deep down an introvert, so this is very difficult for me. If I just turn it up really loud, I'll be good, right?
That's good.
And
it's impressive. Yeah, going from introvert to that is not trivial.
It is not. It is not. And that's why when I see it, I'm like, oh, I know what you're going through, pal. And that's tough. That's a tough place to be emotionally. But when I would go to these things, there would also be the sense of, like, I only get to do this once or twice a year, so I better make it count, right? Ooh. When I switched to thinking about, well, I'm here to help, so I better, listen to where I can help. And if I don't hear anything in this conversation where I can offer any help, I'll just, it'll be a pleasant conversation, but there's no pressure on this thing. And then if I hear a signal like, oh, that's something I can help with, I once did this. Does that sound like it could be useful to you? Right? Like, then all of a sudden, things began to change for me. Right? Like opportunities started appearing more often because I calmed the heck down, and I showed up more often. And my mantra is, how can I help? And it wasn't until I started working with you that, like, I found that term, which is like, oh, it's a service-minded approach. You show up and you want to be of service to a group or a community or organization, right? So I let my hunting in that situation distract me from what I actually could do in that situation. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yet yet also, what an awesome thing to have had the experience
Yeah.
where, oh, I see what I was doing. I was a little bit urgently, trying to make something out of this situation instead of seeing what it was at the time. And so that, I mean, how did you do that? How did you go from like, that's another big transition. Like,
Oh, and it wasn't immediate. It wasn't even close to being immediate. It was like slow realization, reflection, talking with friends. And it
um,
certainly becoming a teacher helped because when I became a teacher, I was thrusted into a situation where it's not about me. You know, it is so not about me when I'm there with those kids, right? Um, I mean, it is, but it's not about promoting my. It's not. I'm not standing in front of the class going like, and that's why you should buy my book, right? Um,
hmm,
and then also starting Kids Read Comics, which became the Ann Arbor Comic Arts Festival, was a huge lesson in, yeah, you're building something that is explicitly about helping certain groups of people that you believe in, right? So that steered my thinking a little bit more and made me a little bit more introspective um, about that the nature of that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, uh, it took a long time. It took a lot of bad experiences, a lot of clumsy and awkward experiences, a lot of me saying stupid things that like still ring around in my head in my darker hours, where it's like how did that comedian Bill Burr described it as the things that you like have to shout out when you're in the shower, like they occur to you when you're in the shower, you have to scream to get those thoughts out of your head.
feel fresh embarrassment for past you.
Yeah,
Mm,
that's so good.
that's really
No, it's not. It's terrible.
really rough. So, I'm wondering what kind of thing we would want to dig into as like our closing thought on this. And would
Okay.
it would it be the, I mean, returning back like full circle, like when do you know if you're established?
Sure. Do
Okay.
we want to attack that as our final thought? I think that's a good place to end on this thing, to answer the question we started out with. And we
Mm.
we took a bunch of like little preliminary stabs around the outside of the mastodon. Let's finish it off.
I'm feeling brutal. All right, let's do this.
All right, so we got to thank some other people who make this Lean to Art cast possible, and those people happen to be us, me and Rob. We make things, we don't just talk about stuff all the time. We also make the things that inspire us to talk about these topics. And I make a comic, and that comic is called Boulder and Fleet Adventures for Hire. And what is it? It's a cute comic about a bear and a bird who are best buddies and go on adventures, and they try to solve problems peacefully. And Boulder is this sweet, gentle, very, very powerful bear who believes very strongly that if he's the most powerful person in the room, he must be the gentlest person in the room. Fleet is this super speedy bird who is very ambitious and wants to be, live in fame and luxury, and is sometimes frustrated with her gentle friends' insistence that they don't pursue this thing too aggressively. There's a Patreon too, and I just started updating the Patreon with some process work on the cover for this story called A Friendly Game, which finished updating at boulderandfleet.com recently. Rob, you make a game.
I do. And the game is called This Panda Needs You. Currently available for iPhone and iPad, and hoping to expand to Android soon. But in the meanwhile, if you happen to have an iPhone and iPad, it's a really mellow game about stacking blocks and solving puzzles and sort of restoring what got to be a mixed up set of blocks back to the pattern that they were. And I mean, there's physics involved and all that. And like, well, where does the panda come in? Well, the panda is the one that finds this nice arrangement of blocks that there's like over 50 levels. So they start out simple, but then they get more complicated. And then, well, this nice pattern of blocks gets messed up because a cloud comes along and knocks them all down. Your job, put it all back to the way it was. And yeah, it's just a really pleasant game. You make a panda dance by solving every level. So how can that be bad? And yeah, learn more about it at this-panda.com, or just, search for This Panda Needs You in the iTunes App Store.
You make a panda dance, and if you purchase the game,
Mm.
A really great thing to do would be giving it a review on the iOS store, iTunes App Store.
Mm.
Uh, give it a five
Yeah.
star review. But if you are here because you like the way we think about things and you don't care so much about the stuff we make, that's fair enough. Because this is the thing we make too, and we make more stuff like that at leanintoart.com/workshops, and there we have video workshops you can download at a price of your choosing. I just had a conversation the last couple days at Nerd Camp talking about sound design with people, and I did that thing again, Rob, where I kind of got a little too excited. They were like, "Well, you care about this subject a lot," and I was like, "You know what? You're right. I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna let you go back to your life." But if you want to hear me rant about it more, you can go download Fatam, a detailed exploration of comic sound theory and design at leanintoart.com/workshops.
What a nice thing to have. Like, yeah, it's a good takeaway. If you're really passionate about a topic, make a workshop so
Yep.
you can just drop that and mellow out the conversation.
But then, if you've already downloaded our workshops, and more will be coming soon, but if you've already downloaded all the ones we have there, a great thing you can do right now that will cost you nothing except a few seconds of your time is if you're watching this video on YouTube, giving it a thumbs up. That helps more people find the show, raises our rankings in search. Or if you listen to the show on a podcatcher like iTunes, Overcast, whichever podcatcher you use, if they have an apps or a podcast store in there, a place where you can search for podcasts, if you could rate it, like in the iTunes store or iTunes. What am I trying to say, Rob?
Well, the podcasts section of iTunes,
Yeah,
and yeah, that's just good old iTunes, I think,
5-star
or
rating.
Apple Music and Apple Podcasts. I mean, yeah, it's a wide world of stuff. We're also in the Google Play podcast section as well,
And on Stitcher. So all
yeah.
those things like help more people find the show. The more people find the
Mhm.
show, the more people who can support us on Patreon or interact with our other stuff. And that helps make the show more sustainable, and we appreciate everybody who has done those things. All right.
Mhm.
Ready to final thought? How do you know, Rob?
How do I look in the mirror, Jersey? I go, this guy.
And you put your thumbs underneath your suspenders and stretch them
Mhm.
out like this.
Like, yeah, right. So, like, so how do I know? How do I know when I'm established? This is the. It is a. It's not a static thing, and it feels like having actually completed full creative cycles helps. Like you need to get your work into the world, you need to advocate for it and what have you. So like feeling like I'm established has I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that this is a static thing. Like I feel like I am continually establishing and have made much progress toward the ability to engage in trade in things that I really believe in and enjoy and have built skill within. That's how I look at it. And I feel that I have credibility because of the things that come up. And I think one of the measures is like, what is the world asking of me? So what kind of conversations am I getting in? And sometimes these conversations lead to we work on a thing together because we believe in it, right? And there's some kind of collaboration, what have you, or there's collaboration where like, no, I mean, this is just core trading skill in business, and this is good, and this helps me pursue the variety of things that I'm interested in. And I've had to make peace with like, I'm just really into a few different kinds of things, and some of them I've allowed. I've increased the pressure as far as like, well, that's the thing I need to use to fund other effort. So you better make money, UX, right? And then other things I've backed off the pressure because now I can, practice and be less fixed mindset about it, right? Try to be growth mindset as often as I can. All right. That's me. How about you, Jersey? When do you know you're established?
Gosh, I just want to say what you said.
I had no idea I was going to say that.
Oh, that was good. Yeah, I try not to get too bewildered by when I see excellence. Like when I see excellence, I mean, and this like maybe this is experience talking, but I know that a lot of hours went into that excellence, and that um I can apply that same effort to move in that direction, right? And I guess that's the framing that I use. That's helped me is that it's not about I want to do that. It's like I want to go in that direction. I want to move in head towards the territory they're in. Make it less about a destination, more about traveling. And this comes back to something I think we've talked about on the show recently. This idea of are you thinking about it as a goal, or are you thinking about it as a way of being?
Yeah. Some goals as thresholds really do help clarify stuff. Did I, lose 2 pounds, right? Did I,
Did I make my deadline?
yeah, exactly. I committed to a deadline. I committed to doing something within a certain budget of effort. I committed to whatever. And
yep,
that's really good too.
We did an episode called Chunking Your Workflow where we talked about just that, right? Creating little tiny thresholds to, distribute the work in a more, manageable way. At least for us. And those kinds of milestones are super useful. And there are big milestones that are super useful. But I get very itchy when anybody starts talking about when they're supposed to happen, right? It's one thing to set a timeline. Like, okay, by this time next year, I want to have this done. But when I start thinking in terms of, well, I'm in my 40s now, and I haven't done this, this, and this, and it's like, okay, well, where's that coming from? Let's look at where that inner voice is coming from, right?
Yeah, that's okay. So knowing you're established, it really sounds like a dialogue. It sounds like a dialogue with yourself, right? Is what you're describing. It's like being willing to be okay with the maybe a more nuanced definition that includes things as like, hey, am I engaging in this activity? And I should look at that as a really positive signal as opposed to like one particular institution or award or whatever. My car has doors that open like this versus like that, right? I mean, it's
right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a perfect example of, like how I don't think about it. And you're talking about the Silicon Valley television show. Where the investor who he's like, my car's open like this, but I want the car's doors that open like that. Like, that's how I know I've made it,
And that works for some folks, right? I mean, but like that's a pretty brittle one, depending on what you choose to engage in trade in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's a heck of a business model building, like straight off of like, creative endeavor. Unless like, it's doable, but.
And I just want to be very careful to point out that neither of us, I don't think, are talking about it all coming from one data point or another, right? It's not something entirely exterior and it's not something entirely interior. It's a combination of both, and it is a dialogue.
Absolutely. Like, and I guess that is a fantastic way to describe the, what I was hoping to convey as indicators, both like me becoming comfortable with a wider definition and not looking at one particular thing, saying like of the different hats that I enjoy wearing, or I maybe some I enjoy more, some whatever, I better and then put all the pressure on one hat. That's got to be the one that does whatever in my life leads to, being able to pay the bills and also be recognized and whatever by, being an important member of a community, whatever. Because I mean, being recognized as being able to be of service in a community is a pretty important step. Mm-hmm. And wherever that is for you, then it's a, are you established? And yeah, I mean, you've crossed the threshold of like wondering if you're established. You can put that past and you'd say like, you're for sure establishing, because here you are, you're in the mix.
Yeah. Change the tense on that word, right? Because you're always establishing, and it's never fixed. It's not fixed. You're never off the hook from having to try. So.
Yeah, well, and then I think we walked around it.
I think we did.
Yeah,
At
that's
least good enough for this week, and we can always come back to it again.
exactly.
I want to thank
Mhm.
Matthew Brown and Shadow Wingtronics, whose birthday was today, and Marlon Javier Vesca Quinones for hanging out in the chat with us today.
Mhm.
So, you guys commenting? Uh,
Yeah.
and the show is produced, which is to say, the show is produced live every Thursday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. One of these days, I will remember to look up the UTC on what 10 p.m. Eastern Time is. But you can do a Google search, like what is Eastern Time in my time zone, and you can find out what that is. But it's every Thursday.
It's
But
-4
is it
or
-4?
+4. Sure, +4.
+4?
Greenwich Mean Time plus. Nope, I'm messing it up. I think it's -4. Sorry, I'm -5 Central Time. Whatever.
Okay. But but
Date
it's
math, everybody. It's fine.
I gotta write a script for this part. But yeah, we do the show live on YouTube at leanintoart.com/live, where you can participate with us as we record the show. But then it's archived at leanintoart.com, and there's going to be a whole bunch of information coming up in a second about where you can talk with us and engage with us. But the big one is patreon.com/leanintoart. That's where we post all the stuff. So thank you, Rob, for this discussion. Thanks to everybody in the chat, and thanks for everybody who downloaded and listened. Until next time, I've been Jersey Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jersey on Twitter.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay. Sorry, Rob. Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right, I'm going to kill the stream. Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. Happy birthday, Troy.
Yeah, happy birthday and awesome Bruce Lee quote, Marlon.
I got to stop.